Okay, so we're about 3 minutes past the hour now. So I think in the giving we don't want to wait too long. I'll just get started, and hopefully people that are joining slightly late can ask any questions at the end that they might have missed. So welcome. Thanks very much for joining the Provar webinar today. My name is Will Hughes, and I'm a senior solution engineer at Provar. And today I'm going to talk to you about how Provar is different. All the different aspects of Provar and Provar's features and benefits with respect to automated testing. And we're also going to have a live demonstration that should take up the majority of this webinar today. The entire webinar should take around 30 minutes, and I definitely want to leave some time for a Q&A at the end. So please put your questions in the Q&A, and we will have some time at the end which I can go through and answer them for you. So without further ado, let me just get started. So just to introduce who Provar is, for those of you that are new to Provar and new to test automation. So Provar, we've been in the test automation space, focusing on Salesforce testing for about the last 10 years. And we have employees all over the globe in UK, EMEA, India, and the US, based in Nashville. We are founded by experts in the Salesforce ecosystem. And that's something that I'll come back to in this webinar quite regularly. And the reason why that's an important factor actually is because that tells a lot of the story as to where we are now. So we really are a test automation solution that is built from the ground up to test Salesforce. And we have been serving kind of Salesforce customers all over the globe, and we now have over 250 worldwide. So to start off with, I just wanted to touch on what makes Provar so special. And the first point on that slide that I'm going to talk about is the fact that we are built from the ground up to test Salesforce. Now, this is actually a very unique thing in the test automation space. We know there are other solutions out there, open source or low code automation tools. But what we can say that we are unique in is the fact that from the very beginning of developing our solution, developing our products, it has been with a focus on Salesforce. And what I'm going to come on to a lot in this discussion is about why that's important for people that are using Salesforce, what challenges Salesforce really throw up in terms of testing, and how we're overcoming them. So the second point there is around our interactive style of creating tests. So this is another reason that makes us special. And you'll see in the demonstration that this style is quite different to other styles that you'll see out there on the market. And what it really does is it gives users more control, but it also gives them a real significant productivity boost because we have features that are built to test the things that you want to test. So for example, users can map steps directly in the user interface. They can watch the testing process happen in real time, and they can execute from any point within a test. So when you consider alternatives, that could be scanning. You might need to be able to scan a page, write some code, or use a recorder. And these are a less efficient approach, because what these processes do is they require you to build the test first and then execute it to see if there are any issues. And then perhaps you might need to go back and refactor the test before building a little bit more. So this is a big waste of time for us. And what Provar allows you to do is to move much more quickly, so you can intuitively build these tests on the go, which is going to save you time and effort. Then the third point of API calls and SOQL queries, and that's a kind of a unique thing with Provar as well. So being able to drag and drop API calls into your test case to either create, update, or delete records alongside your UI steps means that you're going to get much faster test executions. And we refer to one of our clients, actually, a lot of our clients are using this functionality, but one in particular, eClouds, they have been starting to use Provar recently. And to test a large set of forms in Salesforce, they noted that they took their testing time from 3 hours down to 15 minutes. And obviously, these are huge savings that we're seeing benefits across so many of our customers that are really saving them time and freeing them up to do the important work like expanding test coverage or doing exploratory testing for bugs. And then finally, Provar, we should mention, I will come on to this later. Provar is an end-to-end solution. So yes, we do focus on Salesforce, but we can also test anything outside of Salesforce as well. And I'll explain that in a bit more detail a bit later on. So, why is this important? What is the importance of everything that I've just told you? Well, it boils down to a few things, but the one thing that I want to kind of highlight is the fact that, and this comes back to our kind of origin story, the fact that normal automation solutions or testing platforms aren't fit for actually testing Salesforce. And this is the gap that we're filling. So what do we mean by that? Well, actually, there are a number of different reasons, and this is just picking out a handful of them. One that we talk about a lot is the fact that, and we'll all know this on the call, Salesforce do 3 major releases a year. For testing, that could have serious impacts, and we see that across a lot of our customer base, especially if you've got open source frameworks that you've coded. And these kind of tools don't have Salesforce release compatibility, meaning that each time that Salesforce make these release, all the tests that you've built are going to break. So you're going to have to, at the very minimum, spend 3 times a year refactoring your test cases and spend time maintaining them rather than increasing test coverage, for example, or doing the actual testing. So this is a huge factor that Provar actually handles for you. So all of our customers, we don't want them to feel that kind of pain. We update our solution and make our releases in line with Salesforce. Aside from that, and these regular changes, the complex and deep DOM make it very hard to test. So a lot of you will be familiar with this. And also, Salesforce's use of the shadow DOM is also a big reason why traditional tools find it hard to test Salesforce. So things like dynamic IDs, other attributes that are very long and complex. Most traditional tools will find these kind of things very difficult to interact with consistently, and so which makes your tests unreliable. And again, something that Provar has actually done very well at addressing. And testing nested frames is another quite nuance of Salesforce, and these can be very tricky as well. And many automation tools, again, wouldn't be able to navigate through the layers of these frames without complex scripting. But Provar is able to handle these frames without any kind of scripting at all. And then penultimately, most development teams are going to have to maintain multiple environments using different sandboxes to do their development in. And it's going to make all of your testing quite complex, because what you don't want to have to do is to build and write and or record tests against all your different environments and sandboxes, which will create so much more work. But in fact, Provar's look to address that by creating reusable polymorphic tests, which you can test. You can create one test and test it against all your different environments without needing to spend the time building 10 different test cases. And then finally, all Salesforce development is defined and deployed with metadata. So it's really important that whatever tool you're using has the ability to understand and work closely with that metadata. And that's something that, again, I'll focus on in the demo. So what does this result in? Well, something that we speak a lot about is the rework spiral. And with traditional tools, your tests are going to be broken quite regularly in Salesforce if they don't account for those kind of things. So what we are doing with our metadata-driven testing approach, our bespoke component-driven frameworks, is creating more reliable tests so that you don't have to get stuck into this rework. I also mentioned the way that we can interactively build tests mean that you get them right first time. And so what this equates to is, you can see at the bottom of the screen there, that some of our customers are seeing 80 to 90% reduction in their test maintenance. And so what we don't want to happen is for your tests to be more fragile than your customizations. And that's something that Provar takes very seriously. So moving on, I'm actually going to focus this demonstration on kind of the bigger picture here. So usually we would actually focus just on Salesforce, and show you a bit of a demo within Salesforce, but actually we can test so much more than that, and it's important that all of our customers know that. So yes, we can you can see within that circle there some of the core Salesforce applications and the standard applications that go with it. But actually, outside of that, we can test any website, any web application. We can do API testing, we can do email testing, we can do database testing. So it's really important that we can string together all of your user journeys or your customer journeys to make sure that functionally we're testing the end-to-end journey, and that which will translate into higher quality applications and a better customer or user experience. So this is the last slide before I come on to the demo portion. I just wanted to introduce this because what I'm focusing on today is Provar Automation. And many of you will have come to us for for the automation solution, and you can see that in the middle of the screen. What I should mention is that we're actually developing our solution set, and we're building out our suite of products to add on some things like Provar Manager. Now, Provar Manager is a Salesforce native quality assurance hub where you can track your user stories, you can develop test cases and test plans. You can also integrate it across the DevOps and CI/CD life cycle with different tools and applications. And you can also get all of your automation and testing results in Salesforce, which you can visualize on rich dashboards and reports. So it's a real hub where your entire team can work within and really find and see the results and output of your testing. The other thing that on the right hand side of the page is Provar Grid. Now, this really sits on top of Provar Manager, and it's our cloud based parallel test execution server or engine. And it's the real benefit of Provar Grid is it's turnkey, so you don't have to set up any kind of infrastructure, and you can run essentially unlimited number of tests in the cloud whilst then seeing the results of that in Salesforce in Provar Manager. Now, I'm not going to go into that. We'll be having kind of different webinars and sessions on these two other products in the future. So I'd recommend keeping an eye out on that for those future sessions. So now we're getting on to the end, the live demo. And as I mentioned, I'm going to do this slightly differently as we have done before. But rather than just focus just within Salesforce, I'm actually going to take you on how what our capabilities looks like outside of Salesforce too. And I wanted to show you this in an end-to-end flow. So I'm going to, and it's something that comes up a lot with our customers, is how do I automate, my end-to-end lead capture or order to cash or whatever it might be. So this is the demo flow that I'm going to show. So firstly, a prospect is going to fill out a form on an external facing website. And so we've spun up a little web form that is going to do that job for us. The form data is then connected via the backend, via API, into our Salesforce org that we have. And it will create a lead for us with obviously all the data that's already populated in there. Now, I want to then go into that lead, find that lead, and validate some of that data before converting that lead into an opportunity. So whilst it's a fairly straightforward and simple example that I'm showing, it's very common to see across our customers, and it does give you the idea of what an end-to-end journey looks like. So let me just switch over to Provar quickly, and I'll take you through that process. And I'm going to do this all from scratch, by the way, so you'll really be able to see what this looks like if you were to get started with Provar, what that would look like as a test creation journey. So the only thing that I've done so far is I've created a new test, and hasn't got any test steps in there. It's just got a title which is called lead capture and conversion. So the first thing, and I'm going to quite seed in some best practice along the route here. So the first thing that I want to do is actually make this test data driven. Rather than keying in data manually into the test case, I'm actually going to feed in an Excel sheet. And this is something that a lot of people ask for, of how do how can you feed in data? How do you manage data? Well, if I go to my test palette over here and drag in this group step. So test palette, just to explain, is essentially a list of different test operations. So we can set values, we can do sleep stages, we've got Salesforce specific things, and I've just dragged and dropped that into my test case. Now I'm going to call this get data, and then I'm going to add a parameter value source. So we can see from the source type that can be, I'm going to use an Excel spreadsheet, but that could be a database query, JSON file, or CSV file. Now, if I choose my Explorer here, I have created a lead capture data spreadsheet. Now, I don't need to, you can define the worksheet and values name and the values range, but I don't need to do that. And all I know is that my headers are across the first row. So I'm going to call this lead data. And just to show you what what the data in there looks like, we've only got one line of that, but we can add as many different lines of data in there as you want, and then Provar would be able to loop through them. But this is what that data set looks like now. So I just click save on that. And then the first thing, as I mentioned, is I want to go to this this contact us form, so this external website. So that's where I can take your attention down to the bottom of the screen where my connections are. Now, connections are essentially what we want to test. So I have Salesforce connections, and I've added, as this is a demo org, I've added a lot of different orgs in there that I can test against, and you can do different profiles and different languages, that kind of thing. I can also include a UI testing connection, which is testing any website, any web application outside of Salesforce. So that's what I'm going to use for this first step. We can also do web services, so API calls, database, Google, or Microsoft email. To get to the website that we want to, I can just drag and drop this into my test case and save it, and I'm good to go. So we can see in there, we've now got a UI connect step, and it's going to a contact us form. So what I'm going to do is use Test Builder now. So now I'm going to enter the test creation process and start building this out interactively, so that you can see what steps I'm following. So what Provar Test Builder is, this is the interactive test building application, as it says. And and you're going to see a live execution here. So something that I mentioned in the slides that I first showed, but actually, because this is interactive and you have the live execution, I'm getting live feedback as I'm going through this, and I'll be able to tell immediately if any step isn't operating successfully, or I need to remap something. And so again, I'll mention this quite a few times throughout the demonstration, but this is going to help me keep out of that rework spiral that I mentioned. So it's not simply me recording the entire test case and then refactoring it, having to look where the bugs are. And something else that you can see going now is that we've actually got an SSO connection configured into this, which allows the one test step that I've got to launch and log me into the correct form. So usually I'd be starting this point in Salesforce, but I'm going to start mapping some steps in the contact form itself. So first thing I'm going to do is right click on the field that I want to include, and I've now got an option that says add to test case. So once I do that, we'll see some information be displayed in Test Builder. Now, the first thing, I'm going to take you through each individual part of this. And this is going to be slightly different to what you'd see in Salesforce, but just to show you how kind of easy it is to work with non-Salesforce apps. So we follow a page object structure here. And all I need to do for this is define a new page object. So we're going to call this contact us form. Yeah. And then I just need to give it a field name and a value. The field locator is defined for me, so I don't need to do anything. And instead of keying in the values just manually into this, I can call the spreadsheet that I've saved that data in. So we've got lead data and we've got a first name down here. And so now I've done that, I can press add and do, and that will re-execute this step live. So because I've got an interaction type of set. So once I do that, it'll add that step to my test case and re-execute it live for me. And what I can do now is then I can go through each of the individual steps and add the data as they come. One thing that I will mention is I'm actually doing this completely from scratch, and that's why I had to set the page object. If I right click on this and click add to test case, I actually have already set this, so it's only something that I'd have to do once. But we've got a whole list of page objects here, and if I've got chose this contact form, that's actually already got all these fields mapped in there for me. But just to show you what it looks like to do it first time, I'm going to go through each of these and fill in the data here. Okay, so what I'm doing here when I choose the variable, I could type this in automatically, but we've got a function that any kind of user can call by pressing Control and Spacebar that allows us to access the whole list of functions and variables just from kind of the press of a button. So especially useful when I'm doing something like this, when I'm making this data driven, then all I'd need to do, let's just type in company. All I'd need to do is update the data source rather than actually going into the individual test case and updating the values that I've put in. So we've got a few more fields here that I'm going to put in. But as you can see, it's a very interactive way of doing it. I mean, and Provar is doing the heavy lifting for us. So each time I'm just going in and putting the field name in. That wouldn't really be necessary the second time I do this. But actually, this is just showing what this looks like from the very first time you're mapping these steps. And you'll find that, especially with kind of outside of Salesforce testing, we often find that the tests run extremely quickly and they're very easy to kind of work with. So let me just type an email. We're just coming to the end of this section. And the cool thing about this as well, by making this data driven, is that if I had, let's say, if I had 10 different lines in there, then I would only need to do this once. So I'm only going to map these steps once, put in my data like this that are kind of parameterized, and Provar can then iterate through each line of data, going through each of them individually. So you could very quickly create, 10 different lead records in there. One thing that I'll go on to the end is to show you how it looks like when you do that via the back end. So we can do this via the UI like this, or we could do it via the back end as well. Okay, so we got one last field in there, and then we're going to choose this where did we hear about us section, and then submit this form. So I'm just going to choose advertisement. And interestingly, so one thing I'm going to do here is show you how you really don't need to have technical knowledge in order to start testing outside of Salesforce. So one thing I've noticed on this, if I look down the information in the field locator, we've got an ID in there. Now, sometimes that ID might be static, it might be stable, but often when you see IDs with numbers in them, they could be changing. So I might want to update this. Now, Provar actually makes that very easy to do. If I just click on it, I can choose which qualifiers I want to include. So I can decheck that and check the label, which is advertisement. Then Provar does the evaluation of that XPath for us. and determines if it's right. If it was wrong, it would have an error message in there. And then I can set this. So I'm just going to choose click and then add and do. So that's just a good example of how understand you don't need to really know how to build your own XBAR. Provar is going to do the heavy lifting for you, and you'll be able to easily maintain or update any test on the go. So let's just click submit and click. And then we'll do the portion of the test that goes into Salesforce and finds that lead for us. I think that's just catching up. Okay, so now what I can do is actually start stringing together the end-to-end parts of this testing. So if I go back into Provar for us, what I can do is go to the Salesforce org that I want to test within. I'm going to drag and drop that into my test case, add a Salesforce connection, click save, and then step forwards. And what that's going to do then is bring up a new org, which is going to be testing within Salesforce for us. And I can then go to the leads page and find that lead that we've just created. So you can have as many different connections within the test case as you want. What I would suggest if you're using this is to try and maximize reuse. So what I might do is actually split this up into different elements and then just drag and drop them into my test case. That's something that our kind of experts within Provar can definitely help you out with when you start building a test. So I'm just going to go to the lead section over here. And I can see that lead at the bottom of the screen, but I'll just show you how we deal with tables as well, because that's quite intuitive. So if I right click on the name that I want to click on, I'm going to choose add to test case. But actually one thing that I've noticed is that the first name and last name are together. So I'm going to need to put together a variable that accommodates that. So if I go to my test palette up here and choose set values, I'm going to choose full name. And then we'll do a value to be lead data first name, lead data dot last name, and we'll press add and do there. So that when I go to this, I can click on that. And then within the table, Provar will actually handle the navigation for us. So we can define where we click based on a row locator on the data in the table, or we can do it by row number as well. I'm going to do it by the name. So I'm going to go into my lead data and choose the full name that we created. And if I choose add and do, then what that'll do is that'll click on actually the last entry in this lead table. So you'll notice that I actually firstly clicked on the top line there, but because we put in a bit of different data to make Provar actually look for a different name, then we can see that we'll be able to see that click the last entry there. Okay. And so that is actually future-proofing this test case for us. Now, the two things that I want to do is I'm just going to do one validation. So I just want to check that the email is as I expect. So I'm just going to right-click, add to test case. And you'll notice that I don't need to. And so for all of this, you're seeing a slightly different view in Test Builder. And this is our metadata-driven testing approach. So we don't care about the screen locator, the DOM, but actually, instead of that, we've got the metadata here. So Provar's telling me exactly where I am in Salesforce, what field I'm interacting with. It can also predict the interaction type. And so if I choose read or assert, I can assert on this value and actually feed in the email that I've got in my spreadsheet. And if I click add and do, this will add a UI assert step. So one thing to note as I'm going through this, because of that metadata driven testing approach, it doesn't matter about the location of things on a screen. So if I'm testing against different profiles, Provar will be able to accommodate those different layouts. If there are also minor changes in the layout, Provar is going to be able to accommodate that, and your test will be able to run successfully. You're not going to need to refactor them. So the final thing that I wanted to do is just convert this lead. So to do that, I would click on the convert button. And again, you're going to see the same thing pop up in Test Builder, just showing me exactly where I am, exactly the right field, and the interaction type as well. It's got a predictive interaction type. So again, in Salesforce is where you start to see a lot of the real power that the Provar can offer. And because of that close connection with the metadata, it means that the actual test creation process is really straightforward. So you've got about 2 things left to do when converting this. And at that point, we can close out the test creation process. And for this, I'm just going to choose all the new account contact opportunity. We'll click convert. And in Test Builder, what I haven't mentioned yet is you can add wait times, you can add screenshots before and after, and these will all show up in your reporting as well. So that's it. That once that clicks the button, I've created an end-to-end test case that has been data-driven, following some best practices, that has gone to an external website, filled out some data, that has created a lead for us in Salesforce, gone into Salesforce, sorted through a table dynamically using some values that we've created, and then gone to that lead and converted it into an account contact and opportunity. So I hope you found that useful. Now I'll go to some Q&A, and happy to answer some of your questions. Okay, so let me just get the Q&A up now. Seeing a few things. So let me just go through them. So someone says to Marco, saying there, Salesforce QA environment, the updates have caused us major issues. So not a question, just a comment. And that's yeah, exactly right. So what we see a lot of the time, and actually what we try and what's a big selling point for us, is the fact that we can update aligned with the Salesforce releases. So rather than causing loads of issues, it breaking loads of tests, and actually causing loads of bugs in your system, because Provar has the metadata driven testing approach that I've just shown you and explained, we can keep you ahead of that. So let's see what else we've got in the chat. Okay, so can we use Provar to do the automation testing of the native app available on appexchange built on the Salesforce platform? So I think I understand. So yes is the answer. So you can test any different application, whether it's a custom app that's built on Salesforce or whether it's one of the standard applications as well. You can test any of that. And what I've just shown you is testing outside of Salesforce, and then something within kind of Sales Cloud. But if you've got an ISV developing an app, which is on the appexchange, then we actually have a lot of customers that are using Provar to test those as well. Can this connect to Oracle databases? Yes is the answer. So I showed you at the start the database connection type. So one of the connection types that we support is an Oracle database, so you can do that testing as well. Okay, let's see what else we've got. That was the same one. Am I correct that if you set multiple anchors, the test will continue as long as any of them apply, as opposed to becoming more brittle and fail unless all apply? I'm not sure I completely understand this question. I'm not sure what you mean by anchors. If you mean what you can do, if this is in reference to validations or assertions, so the way I'm translating this, if you have a lot of different assertions, the test can continue if any of them apply. But if some of them fail, that the entire test case is going to fail. Well, one thing that you can do is set expected exceptions in your test case, so that if you're expecting something might go wrong, the test case will continue to run if you hit that actually expected exception. If you don't set that, then your test case will fail based on the validations there. I hope I answered that correctly. If not, just drop another question in the Q&A. I can do that then. Okay, so another one here. So most of our tests are in the Salesforce community. So I imagine you're talking about Experience Cloud community site. I would use what type of test would I use for that? Yes, so we do support Experience Cloud testing. Actually, a load of our customers have kind of customer front ends that are built on that kind of application. And yes, you'd use most of the time we would be defaulting to page objects for that, but we're actually building out bespoke frameworks that are focused on support for Experience Cloud sites. So especially if they're using things like Lightning Web Components, then we would have a slightly different approach. But the answer is yes, you can absolutely test across all of those. Okay, so there was so the contact us for the radio button in the form that I showed you earlier, the radio button was hard coded in the demo. How can we get the value stored in Excel as a dynamic value? Yeah, you can absolutely do that. So what I didn't do there was make the kind of XPath there dynamic, but you can feed in parameters into that and make them kind of adaptable that way. So that is something you can do. It's just not something that I did in the demo. What browsers does Provar support? Provar supports all kinds of browsers. So we support, just off the top of my head, support Chrome, Edge, Safari, Firefox. So all the major browsers can be supported. You will need to build your tests in Chrome, but actually then you can run your tests across any different kind of browser. Will it support Azure DevOps to run scripts in the pipeline? Yes, is the answer. We support we can integrate across any kind of CI/CD tool. And actually, there's a lot of documentation on our website to show you exactly which ones we do. But I don't think I've come across a tool yet that we don't support. So yeah, happy to if you need some kind of more information on exactly how we do that, look at our website, get in contact with me, and we can kind of take you through how that works. Okay, so and there was another question about future proofing tests and how I was doing that. Well, the real main way, there's a lot of ways that you can do that, but the real main way I was doing that was by feeding in data and parameterizing data. And it means that depending on, and most of the time, the example that we have is if, for example, you are setting an opportunity close date, then future proofing a test looks like being able to put in a function in there that will always choose a date in advance rather than hard coding data in. So that's really what I meant there. And having the control over your data is important. Again, to kind of future proof your test, mean you don't need to go and continually update it, but actually you can quite easily maintain it from your data source. Okay, what else have we got? Okay, so there's a question about reporting, which is great. So how can we see the report, like pass fail percentage, what's been failed, what steps been failed on, and reason for failure, etc. So something I didn't touch on in the demo is the fact that you can generate reports off the back of your test runs. So this could be an Excel or PDF. In that report, it would show you can define how much logging that you want to be included, and it will show you exactly how if you're doing a whole test run with multiple tests, it will give you a graphic of how many tests have passed versus how many have failed. It will also show you how many test steps have passed, and if it has any failures in there, it will capture screenshots, etc. The other way that we handle reporting is really via Provar Manager, and that's where you get really rich reporting, because you can visualize them in reports and dashboards, and you can amalgamate them into a joint report, that kind of thing. And because it's all in Salesforce, it's really customizable. So obviously, I haven't gone into that today, but again, please keep your eye out on future webinars so that you can see that. Okay, let me just, there are quite a few more questions in there. Let me just find out. So there's one about having a challenge with dealing with delays in the sandbox. So I just want to address that one because it's quite important in terms of what we see with customers. A lot of the time, if you're building Provar tests, the success of it is going to be dependent on, firstly, how you've built it, but also the performance of your application. If there are certain pages or elements that are quite slow to load, then in my experience, I've seen that quite easily break some tests. And so this question is asking about what's the best way to wait for example, a Conga process to finish running, or to wait for a quote to finish recalculating. Really good question. And I showed you in Test Builder that you can add in wait times on each individual step. And that's what I would get into the habit of doing if I was going to automate that kind of process. So we have different options for the wait times. You can just set it to wait for a fixed duration. You can wait for a page to load. You can wait for a pop-up to disappear. So there are different kind of dynamic waits that you can include. If it's a longer wait, you might want to include just a sleep time if you know what that is. But the main thing that I always recommend for different customers is to really understand how your application is going to perform, because it's important when you're starting to build your testing out to have that knowledge so you can then build that into your test case. And coming back to the question that was asked earlier, that is definitely another way that you're looking to future proof your tests, is making sure that the wait times that you're building in are correct. Okay, let me just see. We've got quite a few more questions in here, so let's see how many we can get through. Okay. Um, so just one that's popped up. I was told that someone's been told that Provar is unable to test custom metadata in Salesforce. That's not true. I mean, as I just showed, I mean, Provar can test any kind of standard metadata and custom metadata across any application. And as I've just shown you, we can also test inside and outside of Salesforce. So it doesn't need to be, metadata supported, and it really doesn't need to be metadata supported to be no code and very intuitive. So yeah, just to kind of dispel that comment, we can definitely test both standard and custom metadata in Salesforce. Okay. Can we check time triggered flows? Yes, you can check time triggered flows. I mean, it's a it's a Provar is really kind of a functional testing solution. So the way that I would, without knowing the specific details of what that is, if you can expect a flow to be triggered at a certain time, what I would do is test the outputs of that. So you're doing validations based on whatever that flow is resulting in, and you can set that to run on a schedule. And if something's gone wrong, if it's supposed to be triggered at a certain time and the validations are failing, you know that obviously the flow is failing. But you can set test to run on a schedule, whether it's in CI/CD tools, or using Provar Grid and Provar Manager as well. Okay. Just going through them, trying to get through. There are quite a few other questions in the chat at the moment, so just trying to pick out ones that we're able to get through. Is it true that it's a client installation, not a cloud solution? So yeah, I mean, it's worth noting that Provar is a hybrid cloud solution. So what you've just seen is a kind of client install. We have the ability to kind of manage, run, and execute all our tests within the cloud. and that's via kind of Provar Manager and integrations with things like Git-based repositories and things like that. So we'd say it's a hybrid cloud solution. Okay. Um, Sorry, just going through quite a few questions here. Is it possible? It's quite an interesting one that we get asked quite a lot. Is it possible to have a flow which depends on a field being present or not? I.e., if the field is on the Salesforce page, run the test case one way. If not, run a different way. Absolutely, yeah. So one thing, one thing I sometimes get asked, one thing Provar can't do is is basically identify if something isn't there. However, if I was doing this in real life, if I was doing this in an example, and I had a validation on a field, whether that's visible or not, we can put that into a test case. You can also test whether you're expecting a certain bit of data. So those kind of validations can be put in. You would then put that in some if into an if condition, because if that field isn't there, for example, then what I would do is I would set up an expected exception to so that my test case would continue running. And using some if logic, I could send it down a certain path that says if you're seeing that if you're seeing that error come up because what I'm expecting to be there isn't there, then go down this other route. So yeah, it's very typical that we'd see that kind of that kind of thing and that kind of situation. Okay. So there's one that says, how much time will it take to execute complex test scenarios, including native app built with LWC in and out, inside and outside of Salesforce with an experienced site? We do get asked this question quite a lot, which is why kind of my eyes gravitated towards it. How much time does testing take? That's really going to depend on the complexity of what you're testing, how many steps are in that test case, what the performance of the application is like. So we really can't say how long it's going to take because there are so many different factors that are going to determine that. All you need to know really for this is just like I've shown you, you can absolutely test within a native app. We can test LWC components. You can then go to an experience site and test that all within the same test case. There are ways of making it more efficient, which is by utilizing our API test steps. So, for example, if part of that scenario was to create some records within Salesforce itself, then I would suggest that you leverage API test steps to do that, and then launch the UI to go and kick off whatever kind of UI steps you need to test. So there are different ways that you can make sure that your testing efficiency is maximized, but it's really hard to say how much time will it take to execute a test without kind of understanding of what that test involves. Okay. So see, we've got about 9 minutes left. Let's see how many more questions that we can get to. How can we run our test in parallel using Provar Automation? Really good question. So the way that I've just shown you, you wouldn't be able to run anything in parallels, but there are many different ways that we do support parallel testing. One way is by integrating with a CI/CD or a DevOps tool. One that we see a lot is Jenkins, for example. One that's been mentioned on the call as well is Azure DevOps. And all of these solutions have the ability to run tests in parallel as well. So you can set up your Jenkins job or Azure DevOps pipeline to run your test across different VMs or different servers, which allows you to run your tests in parallel. We also have our own way of doing that now as well. I mentioned Provar Grid. So it's our remote cloud-based parallel execution engine. So when you set up your schedules to run your Provar tests, you can define how many parallel streams you want to run those tests in, and that's all within configuration within Salesforce. It even has a kind of a smart auto split feature, which based on previous runs, it can sort out which machine to run which set of testing to maximize the efficiency. And that's actually utilizing some AI in there. So Provar Grid is the real answer as to how we can run our test in parallel as well as CI/CD tools. Okay, this is another good one. So no problem about the demos. Glad you enjoyed it. But a lot of our test cases around Salesforce have Salesforce flows and Lightning Web Components. Is there anything that we should be aware of? Yes, definitely. I like that question because what we've been focusing a lot on is developing, for some of these things that might not be metadata supported. Previously, you might just need to use page objects, and that's fine because actually we developed our own kind of, it's what we call Provar X. You saw it in the demo, and actually that kind of locator, Provar X locators are much better and more reliable at automating Lightning Web Components. We're taking that a step further now, and we're building bespoke component-driven frameworks, which are technical in the back, in the background. What you need to worry about as users is they are built to automate Lightning Web Components and flows. So we now have full kind of coverage across those two different things. What we call that is Nitro X. Again, have a look on our website, and you'll find some more information on Nitro X. But really, these are bespoke frameworks built specifically to make testing those kind of components reliable, and that's a lot of where our product kind of focus is going in. So it's making that kind of whole experience a lot easier. And again, we're talking about future proofing tests, making them reliable in the long term. This is something that's heavily impacting that. Okay, there are a few questions about integrations with DevOps tools and also integrations with other applications like SAP. I mean, you might have sort of seen that on the slide. Yes, is the answer. We do have integrations with DevOps tools if we want to kind of integrate and run tests on pipelines. At the same time, we also can, I guess, test integrations across different websites and different applications. And that, I think, was one of the main things that I kind of wanted to get across today in the demo, was the fact that we're not limited to just Salesforce. We can absolutely test your entire end to end, and actually do that in a really kind of efficient and easy way. Okay, we only have a few. We're actually getting to the end of this now. How can tests be associated with user stories and tools like Jira? Okay, so that's a good one as well. Well, Jira, we've got a couple of different ways of integrating with it. Firstly, we can use the Jira API. So a lot of the time in our actual test cases, a use case that we see a lot is if I wanted to maybe post back bugs into Jira, we can do that via the Jira API. So in the same way that we can make kind of any REST call to any open API endpoint, we can do the same thing with Jira. On the other hand, we also have an integration with Jira via Provar Manager, which lets us import user stories directly from Jira. And then we can start associating test cases with those user stories within Provar Manager as well. So what we're really trying to do there is to shift testing left so that you're considering what you're testing and your test coverage much earlier on in your kind of development and your software development processes. So at the point where you're developing your user stories, you can start associating Provar tests with them as well. Okay, there's another one here around email to case functionality, and it does cover off an important point as well. For the email to case functionality, can you start mapping from Outlook when the email is sent to the customer to the case being resolved in the same test case? Yes, you definitely can. I've seen it done many times. We have email testing there. So what you can do with our email testing capability is you can send or receive emails. When you receive emails, you can kind of look at what is in the body of the email. I've seen use cases where actually hyperlinks in the email are clicked, so you can access a certain page. But yes is the answer to that. So firstly, in that email to case, you'll be able to send or receive an email depending on what you're doing, and then you'll be able to go into Salesforce in the same test case and check that that case is being resolved. So you might be checking the status of it, you might be assigning it to someone, but yes is the answer. You can stitch together those two things. Okay, there's a question of, is there a way we can get to try and test Provar? Yes, definitely. The best way, either you can email sales@provartesting.com and request support from one of us, but we'd happy to take that on a case by case basis. We have the University of Provar, which is an online learning platform which is free for anyone to use, and it's got um, a lot of different core video led content in there, which are training courses based on Provar and the wider testing ecosystem. And at the same time, we also offer trials or POCs, but just get in contact with us, and we'd be happy to sort you out. Yeah, there's a few questions in there around the trial version as well. Okay, so we're about 1 minute at the end. And I see a few people kind of dropping off. There have been a bunch of questions in the chat that I haven't managed to get to, but we are at the kind of full hour at the moment. So I'm going to close up there, but we will do our best to get in kind of contact and answer any questions that you have. If there are some immediate questions, please just kind of get in contact either directly with me or directly with one of the team. I think we have some of our details on the invite, but also feel free to link in with me and you can we can chat there. But I hope you've enjoyed the session today. Again, I mentioned, look, I will be having future webinars on different aspects of our solution in future quarters. But thank you very much for your attendance today and have a great day.